unravel three major themes here that come to the top of my head. And they would be, number one, that Texas and Oklahoma leaving the Big 12 was a one big giant gap for the Big 12. And secondly would be that the Big 12 is, of course, well behind the Big 10 and the SEC. We already knew that. It'll be interesting to go through the numbers and see it compared to the ACC when we look at that conference on Wednesday. But then also the Deion Sanders factor is ridiculous. I don't know. When can we think of a time in which one man, regardless of what you think of him, when one man has had this much impact on television ratings? That question just popped into my head. I did not plan on talking about that. I don't have an answer because I don't think there is an answer. It's Deion Sanders. He has had more impact on television ratings than any singular person in college football history. No, there are other brands that brought in big numbers. We know who they are. But in terms of one guy, was Alabama not drawing television ratings before Nick Saban? And then it fell off after Nick Saban? No. I don't know who that would be. If you've got a possible counter to the point that I'm making, please let me know. Because I don't know who that would be. I do not know who that would be. It's unprecedented what Deion Sanders has done in regards to his ability to draw people to a screen. All right, let's go through the Big 12. This is week 0 and week 1. And this is the viewership in each game. So the Big 12 accounted for the 6th highest rated game of the week. That's Colorado and North Dakota State at almost 5 million, 4.76 million on ESPN. That game was on a Thursday night opposite North Carolina, Minnesota. Let's see what that game did. So North Carolina, Minnesota. In any other year, North Carolina, Minnesota on Fox would outrate Colorado and North Dakota State without Deion Sanders. No question about it. Well, on this particular night, Minnesota and North Carolina did 1.8 million, while Colorado did 4.76 million. Wow, that's crazy. Think about that. 1.8 million for a Big Ten ACC game that would normally outrate the game between a Big 12 and an FCS team that did 4.8 million, almost 3 times as many people. I actually watched the Minnesota-North Carolina game myself. All right, so that was the number 1 game in the Big 12. That was number 6 nationally. The 8th rated game of the week was Penn State and West Virginia at just a shade under 3 million. Then you had TCU and Stanford at 1.5 million. That was number 16. And then you've got Arizona, New Mexico at just under 1 million at 953,000 on ESPN. And you can also see the television networks listed there. And then we had a just monumental triple header on FS1. Look at this triple header. These were the 29th, 33rd, and 35th ranked games of the week. Iowa State, North Dakota, Arizona State, Wyoming, and Houston UNLV all did between 170,000 and 315. Basically, nobody watched them. That was the FS1, and that was a triple header. Those 3 scintillating games in a row. So there were 45 games in week 1 and week 0. Nationally televised games, 45. And the Big 12 had the number 6 game, 8, 16, 21, 29, 33, and 35. And this is basically what we're going to see. Aside from Colorado popping into the top 5, we're basically going to see the highest ranked game in the Big 12 be around 10th. meaning basically the SEC and the Big Ten have almost all the spots in the top 10 besides like a Florida State or a Clemson popping up, Notre Dame. All right, week 2, there you see Texas, Michigan on Fox, number 1. Number 2, there we go. You put together Colorado with a blue blood in Nebraska, and you're going to draw some people. And what we see there is 5.67 million. That was the second highest rated game of the week, and it was on NBC. At number 5, Oklahoma State, Arkansas, 2.8 million on ABC. The 8th rated game of the week, Iowa State, Iowa, at 2.3 million. So the Big 12 had 4 of the top 9 with Baylor and Utah. So that's not bad. That's a pretty good week for the Big 12. Out of 31 games, they had 4 of the top 9. See Texas Tech and Washington State, over 1 million on Fox. Arizona State, Mississippi State was on ESPN late night, just under 1 million at 9:54. BYU and SMU, which turned out to be one of the games that was talked about more than just about any game in college football because of the playoff implications. We didn't know it at the time. 917,000 watched that on a Friday night on ESPN2. That's a pretty good number, actually, for ESPN2. Kansas, Illinois on FS1. Kansas State, Tulane. Cincinnati, Pitt. Cincinnati and Pitt. My goodness, nobody watched that game. 304,000 people watched it on ESPN2. That was a noon game on Saturday. On to week 3. Highest rated game of the week. Georgia, Kentucky on ABC, 6.6 million. Highest rated Big 12 game. Colorado State. Remember last season, 2023, when Colorado played Colorado State, late night, 10:30, and over 10 million people watched that. That was the week after Colorado beat TCU, who had gone to the national championship game, and that hoopla, that momentum started. Not nearly the number this time around at 3.25 million, but still, at no other time in history would Colorado and Colorado State get 3.25 million. That game was on CBS. That was the 5th highest rated game of the week. Arizona, Kansas State played on a Friday night, the 7th highest rated game of the week. Followed by Kansas, UNLV, West Virginia, Pitt. Now here's when you try to put these games in perspective in regards to viewing audience. Here's a good measure right here. So West Virginia Pitt, the season before, played on a Thursday night, week 1 on ESPN. So there was only competition of one other game. It was Penn State and Purdue. West Virginia Pitt got over 3.5 million views on ESPN on a Thursday night. 1 year later, they're playing on a Saturday afternoon on ESPN2 against a ton of competition, and they get 1/3 of the audience, 1.15 million. You see the TCU-UCF game at just over 1 million. So the Big 12 had 5 games over 1 million viewers that week. And then you had some real dogs down the line with the likes of Arizona State, Texas State. That was a Thursday night game on ESPN that actually almost got 1 million views. But beyond that, it got really bad with the likes of Oklahoma State, Tulsa, Texas Tech, North Texas, Baylor, Air Force, Cincinnati, and Miami of Ohio. 51,000 people on ESPNU. That's about as low a viewership total that you will see for a power conference game. 51,000 people. On to week 4 with your contributions. All right, week 4. There we go. Colorado Baylor, 5th highest rated game of the week. Colorado outdistanced everyone in the Big 12 every week. The number 1 game in the Big 12 was Colorado every week. This time against Baylor, 3.64 million. That game was on Fox. Utah, Oklahoma State, before we knew that they both sucked. was over 2 million on Fox. Kansas State, BYU over 1 million, as was Kansas and West Virginia. Arizona State, Texas Tech at 410,000. TCU, SMU, nobody watched that on the CW. The CW showing up here in the Big 12 at TCU, SMU. That was a 64-42 game. 66-42. Iowa State, Houston, 372,000 people watched that game on FS1. I'm sorry, I got my weeks confused. Week 4, Houston, Cincinnati, 195,000. Now on to week 5, Georgia, Bama, 12 million on ABC. This actually was the same week that the Big 12 posted its best in-conference number the entire season. If I asked you what game in the Big 12, what conference game in the Big 12 had the highest television viewership, your response would be what? Colorado and UCF? Yep, that's the answer. 4.17. Actually, I think I'm off by one game. Regardless, 4.1 million people watch Colorado and UCF. 4 million people watch Colorado. 170,000 people watch UCF. Oklahoma State, Kansas State at 1.88 million. And then everything else was under 1 million in the Big 12. Arizona, Utah was the 13th highest rated game. 907,000. Then the Big 12 had the 18th, the 20th, and the 21st highest rated games at 428, 417, and 372. Iowa State and Houston only got 327,000 views on FS1. And just to let you know what that number means, that does not mean the total number of people that watch the game. That's the average number of people that watched a game at any given time. So if you see that 4 million people watched a football game, that doesn't mean over the course of the entire game, only 4 million people came across the game. That means on average, there were 4 million people watching the game. There could have been 6 million people watching in the first half, and then it was a blowout, and it tailed down to 2 million in the second half. But at the average minute, there were 4 million people consistently watching that game. On average. Week 6, not any huge games in terms of numbers. There we see that Tennessee, Arkansas, Auburn, Georgia, Iowa, Ohio State, and Michigan, Washington all did over 4 million. As for the Big 12, the Big 12's best game in week 6 was the 9th rated game. Way down the list, Houston and TCU at 1.5 million, and that was on a Friday night. Baylor, Iowa State at 1.2 million. Those were the only 2 Big 12 games over 1 million viewers. Texas Tech, Arizona at 943. West Virginia, Oklahoma State, only 634,000 people watched that game on ESPN2. And then the lowest rated Big 12 game of week 6 was Kansas and Arizona State at 525,000. That was on ESPN2. That was the 23rd rated game out of 31. Week 7, Ohio State, Oregon, 9.6 million. Texas, Oklahoma at 7.6. Number 1, though, in the Big 12 was the 6th rated game. Kansas State and Colorado at 3.2 million. Arizona, BYU at 1.3 million. Arizona State, Utah at 1.2 million, as was Iowa State and West Virginia. Cincinnati, UCF at 280,000. That's a lousy number on ESPN2. Number 23 rated game on the week out of 34 games. So the Big 12 had 2 of the top 10, 4 of the top 13. On to week 8. Georgia, Texas, the number 1 game in week 8. Way down the list in number 8 was the highest rated Big 12 game, Colorado, Arizona at 2.02 million. And that's probably the lowest rated Colorado game of the entire season. Oklahoma State and BYU played down to the wire on a Friday night at 1.66 million. Kansas State and West Virginia just over 1 million. TCU and Utah at 912,000. Also UCF and Iowa State at 526. Baylor and Texas Tech at 316. 32 games played in week 8. And the Big 12 had 2 of the top 10. 5 of the top 17. Week 9, Ohio State, Nebraska, the number 1 rated game of week 9 at just under 6 million, followed by Missouri, Alabama, and LSU and Texas A&M all over 5 million. But in the Big 12, the best showing was Texas Tech and TCU at 2.36 million. That was the 8th rated game of the week. Number 9 was Cincinnati, Colorado at 2.3 million. BYU, UCF at number 13, Kansas State at 17. West Virginia, Arizona only garnered 347,000 views. FS1. On to week 10. And a week showing by the Big 12 in week 10 out of 25 games. The number 1 game was Ohio State and Penn State at 9.77 million. Florida, Georgia at 6.97. So you had 3 games over 5 million, and you had 4 games over 2 million. The Big 12 had none of those. The highest rated Big 12 game, surprisingly, Kansas State and Houston on Fox at 1.5 million. Texas Tech, Iowa State at 1.24 million, and then TCU and Baylor, Arizona, UCF, nowhere to be found at numbers 16 and 19 out of 25 games that week. And Arizona and UCF played a 56-12 game in front of 213,000 people on FS1. I wonder when I see that, who's watching that game at 3:30 in the afternoon or 12:30 on the West Coast? You want to watch a college football game, and you're watching Arizona and UCF, a 56-12 game between 2 lousy teams. I'm surprised even 213,000. Family, friends, hardcore alumni. All right, on to week 11. Week 11 gave us Alabama, LSU at 7.9 million. Georgia and Ole Miss also topped 7 million, and then it dropped off from there. Highest rated Big 12 game in week 11, you guessed it, Colorado against Texas Tech. Every time Colorado stepped on the field, they had the highest rated game in the Big 12, 3.68 million. BYU, Utah at 2.07 million. That was a really good game, went down to the wire. UCF, Arizona State at 378. Oklahoma State, TCU at 355,000. So at this point, there's still no real momentum behind Arizona State. Only 378,000 people watched them play on ESPN2, and this was week 11. Week 12, while Tennessee and Georgia almost got to the 10 million mark, in week 12, it was Colorado and Utah at 4 million. Decent number. That was the 5th highest rated game of the week. Kansas and BYU at number 18 at 1.75 million. Cincinnati, Iowa State at 1 million. Arizona State, Kansas State at 849,000 on ESPN2. Baylor, West Virginia at 513,000 on ESPN2. Week 13. Final week of, no, one more week. Week 13. And the highest rated game was Ohio State, Indiana at 9.3 million. In the Big 12, look at that number. That was the highest rated conference game of the year. And I believe the highest rated game, period, yes, involving Big 12 teams. Colorado and Kansas, 6.22 million. Why that game? I don't know. But it was on Fox. I know Kansas won the game. Iowa State, Utah was the 9th rated game of the week at 1.9 million. BYU and Arizona State at 1.3 million. And the rest of the games were off in the distance. Out of 29 games played in week 13, the Big 12 had the third highest rated game, number 9, 11, 21, 25, 26. And these games were just dogs. Cincinnati, Kansas State, Baylor, Houston, and a whopping 117,000 people watched UCF and West Virginia on ESPNU. Final weekend of the season. Now, this is when the rivalries take hold. It is rivalry week, but just not in the Big 12. Ohio State, Michigan, number 1 at 12.3 million. And then on from there. Where does the Big 12 show up? At number 8, Colorado, Oklahoma State, 3.3 million. And that game was 52-0. So I explained the average minutes viewed. I bet that game was more in the 6 million range early in the game, first half, and then died at 52-0. Kansas State, Iowa State, very important game, 2 million. That ushered Iowa State into the Big 12 championship game. Houston, BYU at 1.5 million. And UCF, Utah, they're at 844. Kansas, Baylor at 412. And West Virginia, Texas Tech playing out the string at 294,000 viewers. There we have championship weekend. And this is a decent, really good number, actually, for the Big 12, because this is always going to be SEC number 1, Big 10 number 2. Always has been, unless the Big 10 has a substantially better game than the SEC. The SEC rules championship weekend by over 6 million more views than Oregon, Penn State. But then at the number 3 position, Arizona State, Iowa State. Close game in the first half. Arizona State blew them out in the mid-third quarter, while Clemson and SMU went down to the wire. That's a good number to win that ratings battle against the ACC, playing a worse football game against a drama-packed game, and to get almost 1 million more views. That is a good sign for the Big 12. When we look at the bowls, wow, BYU and Colorado, 8 million viewers. That was the Alamo Bowl on ABC. See if we can find it. There it is. And that was not a good game. BYU blew them out. But it goes from 8 million to Iowa State and Miami at 6.7 million watched that game. Then it drops to Texas Tech, Arkansas at 4.2 million. Kansas State, Rutgers at 3.5. And then I can believe who's watching TCU in Louisiana, 1.2 million. You're bored. You want to watch football. It's cold outside. It's just after Christmas. West Virginia, Memphis played a really good game, 1.2 million. We had Colorado, Kansas at number 1, Colorado, UCF at 2, Colorado, Utah at 3, Colorado, Texas Tech at 4, Colorado, Baylor at 5, Colorado, Oklahoma State at 6, despite it being 52-0. Colorado, Kansas State at 7, Arizona and Kansas State at number 8, followed by Texas Tech and TCU, and then Colorado back at it at number 10 against Cincinnati at 2.34 million. Colorado accounted for all Big 12 games, 10 of them, that garnished at least 3 million views. If you total the entire Big 12, you had 1 game over 6 million views, 3 over 4 million, 7 over 3 million, 14 over 2 million, and 34 games over 1 million. That's out of 62 total, 34 over 1 million, the other 28 under 1 million. That's not a good number. What is a decent number is that out of the 11 playoff games, Arizona State, Texas, you can attribute this probably to Texas more than Arizona State. I get it, but still, Arizona State, Texas did 17.3 million. It went to overtime. That helped, no doubt. I'm sure it peaked late in the fourth quarter and overtime, but 17.3 million people watched Arizona State, Texas. That game did better than Notre Dame, Georgia, two major brands, and Ohio State, Tennessee. Out of the top 100 games, 26 were played by Big 12 teams. Now, that sounds fairly impressive, but consider there was a Big 12 team present in 26 of those games. So that's not 100 total teams. That's 200 total teams. So the Big 12 represented 26 times, Colorado 11 of the 26. And again, Colorado had the top 10 games played by the Big 12 in TV viewership at over 3 million. And they had the top 7 conference games. All Deion Sanders, all Travis Hunter, all Shedeur Sanders, all Buffs. That's our Big 12 ratings breakdown. And again, we're going to go with the ACC on Wednesday, the SEC on Thursday, and the Big 10 on Friday.